Well, welcome everybody. I just want to start by saying that I'm a much better letting agent and estate agent than I am a public speaker, so please bear with me. So, welcome everyone this evening. We've got a jam-packed night, so thank you all very much for coming. It's good to see some familiar faces as well as some new. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Cara Cadaroon. I'm one of the directors at Star Students and Rosewood Property. And we're really pleased to be presenting this event tonight. I'd like to start by saying a fantastic thank you to our speakers and of course all of you for being here tonight. Now we're always keen to engage with landlords and make sure that both you and we are all staying up to date on important topics affecting our sector, whether it's current regulations, upcoming changes or simply sharing our knowledge and our insights. Just a quick housekeeping note, there is no fire alarm due to be sounded tonight, so if it does go off, then it's the real thing. We need to make our way down to the car park. If anybody needs any assistance, then let me know. So we have got some great speakers tonight. We've got from Trower Solicitors, Trower & Hamlins, going to be doing a Q&A session on the renters' rights, which that's going to be after the break, so we are going to keep you here until then, because I'm sure that's one you're really keen on as well. We've got Alex Dribbling from Sunflower Energy, going to be talking about solar panels, and Mark Glanfield from Homesmart Surveys talking about EPCs and the changes there as well. Many of you will know that there's ever revolving changes, rules, regulations. We've seen many. We're going to see many changes to the tenancy agreements and the fixed terms, and we're starting to see some landlords looking to exit the market. But that's, not everybody is, because some people, they've obviously got tax implications as well, so they're, some of them are stuck, who are stuck. So we've got to change how we're thinking with the regulations that are changing with us. So just so I get a feel of the room, can I have a show of hands of how many people are HMO landlords? Okay. And how many are residential, have residential properties? Great. And how many of you have been landlords for 10 years? Okay, 20? Okay. 50, wow. Anybody over 50? Okay, but if you've been in the market for 10, 15, 20 years, then you've certainly seen a lot of changes. Some of you may not be, you're going to be unfazed by all of this, but some of you may be getting a bit fed up by the constant shifts. I often reflect back, I've said this before in one of our events, that when I got into the 90s, I used to photocopy a tenancy agreement and fill in the gaps. There was no gas safety certificate, there was no real such thing as an inventory. We didn't have to register deposits, EPCs, EICRs, right to rents, the list goes on. But, things have evolved and so have we. We've weathered many storms, and you're all here today, and no doubt we're going to weather a few more. The private rented sector continues to grow and demand remains high. While Exeter University students have started to level off this year, there are still lots of plans in the pipeline. There's looking to be 7 more buildings to be built at St Luke's campus. And Exeter University itself has risen to 14 places globally in the prestigious rankings. And it still remains at 13th place nationally, which suggests that Exeter is still a good hotspot. New investors, they're doing their homework, and Exeter, is always up the top there. It's a good place to invest. We don't want you to leave here tonight worried or stressed. That's not the purpose here at all. We want you to continue to be a landlord in the market, where property is needed more than ever at the moment. Now I can't let you all go without just telling you a little bit about our services. And I'm sure some of you would like a little bit more time, want to enjoy your hobbies, spend time with your families, or go on that well-earned holiday. We're here to support you with that. And at whatever stage you are as a landlord, some of you may be just starting off. As I say, quite a lot of you have been in the business for decades. How can you achieve this freedom? Well, let's start by communicating. We're all here to talk, so please come and speak to us, or you can arrange a call back or pop in for a coffee. Sometimes face to face can make a big difference. we send out regular newsletters and blogs, so if you haven't signed up for these, we have got some slips at the back, and you could actually, tonight, we will be running a draw for a £50 Amazon gift voucher, so make sure you pop your name down. And we offer services from tenant find, rent collection, full management. We do sales, and those of you that are looking to expand your portfolios, we can help you identify some good opportunities there as well. So whatever your goals are, we're here to help you achieve the freedom and enjoy the things that matter to you. But for now, thank you very much for being here. I hope you find this evening informative, engaging, and get valuable opportunity to connect with others in the community. But let's start by welcoming our first guest speaker, Mark Glanfield from Homefield Surveys.
Hello.
Actual clicker. Slideshow.
Okay, are we up
There
and
you
running?
go.
Oh wow. Well, that looks quite posh, doesn't it? Right, hello, welcome everyone. It's nice to see everybody, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to chat to everyone about EPCs. You'd be glad to know that this is going to be the shortened version of EPCs, but I could be here for 3 weeks talking about them. But 15 minutes, run through fairly quickly, and then at the end of the show, if you've got any questions, immediately afterwards. I think we've got 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Alternatively, perhaps when we're having a break, you can come over and have a chat with me. So, here we go. Yes, so I'm an energy assessor. I cover both domestic and commercial EPCs, and this presentation I'm going to be talking about EPCs overall. I'm going to be talking about where we are with the current level of software we're using for EPCs, what's coming in the future with EPCs, and meeting the requirements for the future as well. So, overview. I think most people here will know what an EPC is. I probably don't need to go into too much detail, but it provides the energy performance of a property. I'm sure that, by the way, you're taking pictures. I'm sure the slides will be available, so they're not secret, you can have them. So yes, it's all about energy performance. It looks at the efficiency of the building fabric, so it looks at the fabric, how is it constructed. It looks at the systems within the building, so we're looking at heating systems, lights, windows, all those sorts of things. And with a domestic EPC, it also looks at the cost of fuel as well. That will impact the rating. So if you've got an expensive fuel in your property, it will make the EPC lower. That's the good. The EPC provides sets of recommendations. It's required for both rental and selling. I'm sure you already know that anyway. And there's also something known as the Minimum Energy Efficiency Standard, MEES in short. And currently, if you're renting, as I'm sure you know, you need to have an E rating. But in the future, and this is not yet agreed, but it's proposed that we'll be looking towards a C rating from 2028 for new tenancies and 2030 for existing tenancies. Now, this is just my interpretation of what I'm hearing through various meetings and conferences I've been to recently. But it is worth noting that it isn't yet agreed. There's a consultation currently going on, and until that consultation comes out and an agreement is made, it isn't. And I think it's going to be sometime next year, 26, before you actually know. So, in the meantime, EPCs are carrying on, and on the 15th of June, we had an upgrade in the software to something called RDSAP 10. RDSAP 10 brings with it all sorts of changes, improvements, I would hope, or hope you would see them as improvements. Biggest change for 8 years. There to improve the accuracy of EPCs and gets rid of some of the assumptions and generic information that we have been using in the past. And because of the change, as a consequence, the EPC surveys have all of a sudden become very much more complex. To give you an idea, a typical 3-bed house that used to take me about 30 to 40 minutes now takes just over an hour. So it adds about 20 minutes, 25 minutes to a typical house. Because we've got to look at all the windows, measure them all, so we're not sort of generically saying this is the window type for this house. We are saying this is the window for this part of the house all the way around until we've completed that. Rooms in the roof, so attic rooms within the roof space. That's another quite big change. We're having to do an awful lot more measurements now in those types of rooms, sloping ceilings, gable ends, and in some ways that gives us more flexibility in terms of being able to assess those rooms, and we can look at insulation levels, for example, in the different parts, but nevertheless there's quite a bit more work to do for that. Ventilation's another thing that's going to add in all sorts of extras that we didn't see before, like have we got open flues, closed flues, open chimneys, have we got extractor fans in the bathrooms, all those sorts of things. And we finally got to a point where we can include solar PV batteries in the assessment, which should, if you've got them, improve the assessment as well. And also something called PV diverters, where you've got solar PV heating the hot water. Right, so in the future, we've got a methodology change coming. We've had that RDSAP 10, as I've called it, come in very recently, but probably 26, 27 is going to be quite a big change in the way that calculations for EPCs will happen, and it's going to be something called the Home Energy Model, HEM for short. I've been to a conference fairly recently, and there's a huge amount of detail going into that development. I think we're still going to have EPCs, but under the consultations, the EPC reforms that are coming along, and just to sort of let you know, fairly recently there was a consultation out for EPC reform, and the government departments that are looking into this have received 17,000 responses. So they're currently working through those, because people like yourselves may have well contributed to that, so that we get the EPC brought up to date, perhaps more relevant than it is today, and I think from a government point of view, it covering all the various areas that we need to as we head to, dare I say it, net zero. And you all may have opinions on that. So that's it. Meeting the future requirements, however, so if you need a little bit of help on how you do that, I can help. And I've got my way of doing it, where I do modelling, and I can produce a report based on an EP assessment and say to you, right, well, if you want a C rating, as we most likely going to need to have in a few years' time, these are the things you need to do. And it's quite specific because I'm using the EPC software to produce that information. So, as I've said there, it's basically an EPC pre-assessment, scenario modelling, that's what I'm doing. It produces this options report, so if I can give you a couple of options, something to think about, then why not? Further down here I've mentioned renewables such as solar PV. That's one way of improving your energy efficiency, and no doubt we'll hear more about that later on. Common improvements, things like putting more insulation in your property, improving your heating system, get a more efficient one in, removing unnecessary secondary systems. That's actually quite an interesting one, and you can instantly get 2 or 3 points extra if you take an electric fire that might be in your living room that you don't need, because that does impact on the overall assessment. But me doing this sort of review will identify those things. Remove any unnecessary ventilation. So with these new ventilation requirements, if you've got holes in the wall or in the chimney, it does actually impact the rating. So make sure you're fully covered as far as that's concerned. So there we are. That's what I can do potentially to help you. So in summary, we've been talking about EPCs, energy performance of property, recommendations for improvement, the MEES, minimum energy efficiency standard, going to be moving to a C rating. I mentioned about IDSAP 10 and how that's changed things. Moving to the home energy model, and what can we do to help in the meantime with pre-assessments and option reports. And that's it from me, so I think I'm now ready. I went through pretty quickly there, by the way, but I wanted to cover all the various areas that are in my head as far as EPCs are concerned. But I think more importantly, if we've got questions, then can I answer them? That will be the question. Thank you. So, any questions? How do we want to play this? Shall we have this gentleman here?
Am I right in thinking that this new RDSA P10, that's already in force, is it?
Yes, it was launched on the 15th of June.
Right.
And it's, I won't say anymore. I was going to say it hasn't come without its problems, but it is being worked through, and yeah, it provides lots more detail in what needs to be collected in the survey, but I think it does actually mean that we're moving more to actual, state of the property rather than those assumptions and generic values. Yeah. Yes,
We
sir.
had 6 EPCs done in December last year,
Yeah.
which at the moment, according to the paperwork, are valid until 34. I presume they're still valid.
Yes. Yeah. No. There's no. As far as I've heard, there's no intention of anybody having to replace their EPCs until the expiry date.
Can you just comment
I'll
on
come back to you in a minute.
just the bizarre thing,
Yeah.
having all these, 6 EPCs done at the same time.
Yeah.
In fact, 2 of them reversed the previous EPCs that were done. So one flat that had a D rating suddenly became C, fine. But one that was previously C reversed it and became D. I mean, that just seems so bizarre.
Yeah. So, I mean, all I can say on that is that every assessor is trained to deliver the EPCs and actually do the survey, carry out the surveys in exactly the same way.
It's the same assessor that did the first one.
Yeah.
Looks better than it.
But without looking at it in detail, I couldn't tell you. But be aware, ladies and gentlemen. I've done I've actually done 7,000 EPCs now, and I've replaced old EPCs. And unfortunately, there's been some that have been C ratings and have turned out to be D ratings, a bit like the scenario you were suggesting. And that's because the original assessment was wrong. You know, the assessor hadn't correctly done the assessment.
But it also seemed to be that the criteria now being used, particularly in terms of it's an old house, the volumetric space in the rooms wasn't previously calculated on the EPC.
Yeah.
And
There's not been a lot of change in the overall EPCs in that sense from a fabric point of view. There's more things added in, and the only other thing I would say on that is that there's a lot more checking going on now about how good an EPC. I mean, I'm audited quite regularly on assessments I carry out, and whilst 10 years, 12 years ago, you could get away with perhaps doing an inadequate EPC, you can't now. I would say that any EPCs produced today, unless you're very unfortunate, is likely to be more accurate than the older one. Sorry, a gentleman behind the one that's just speaking. I'm sorry, I don't know any of your names.
So in simple terms, if you've got a D now,
Yeah.
is your prediction it's going to be more difficult in the future to get that to a C, or will the boundaries move because of the impact on the potential number of houses available to rent if the bar is set too high?
Yeah, no, it's a good point actually. As far as the technical assessment is concerned, it won't change. We might add new things in that we haven't previously covered, like batteries, which will probably improve the efficiency because that all helps. But the technical assessment will be the same. I can't see it changing unless because we've got these boffins that keep looking at the results that EPCs produce, and occasionally the insulating value of a solid brick wall, in fact it happened a few years ago, slightly improved because it was felt that solid brick walls were better than was being assessed. So they made a small, but we're only talking half a point. We're not talking a big stuff here. It's tweaks. So yeah, I think the second part of your question, which was, remind me.
Well, I was trying to work out whether a D it was going to be easier or more difficult to go from D to C in the future, or whether the impact of doing that would have too great an effect on.
Right. So I don't think technically it's going to make any difference.
Right.
But I do think that when the consultation is complete and somebody's made a decision on what the exemptions might be when we need to get a C, because at the moment we've got the conflict between the net zero team that want us to be a C or even a B tomorrow, and then you've got the housing communities part of government that say, oh, hang on a minute, you can't do that because all the landlords, all of you will sell up your houses and we won't have any housing. So there is a balance to be had there, I think, and there is that debate, and that's partly why there is a consultation, because we need to know what the impacts are. But good question. Sorry, right, who else? In the front. I'll come back to you later.
Two questions actually, but one is when you said about you've had an update, but you said about the EPCs being reformed.
Yeah.
When is that going to coincide with 2028?
Right, that's a good question. My understanding is that the reform, this HEM model that we're talking about, will be part of what we need to achieve by 2028. So we should have the new model by 2028. Again, there's lots of debate going on about what we're going to do. Some of it, for example, is we're going to need to display the EPC in a slightly different way, because at the moment, the main rating on an EPC talks about, ABC. That's all about energy efficiency, together, tied in with the cost of the fuel. It isn't about the carbon footprint part of it. If you read down an EPC in the words, it will say what your rating is for carbon for the environment. In the old EPCs, if you go back before the ones you see online, there were 2 rating scales, right? And I think we're now thinking, well, perhaps we need to have a second rating scale. For example, it shows clearly what the carbon footprint improvement would be. Because one of the other issues, sorry we're going on a bit here, but one of the other issues is that, there's a big push to try and get heat pumps put into people's houses. But of course a heat pump doesn't actually help with the ratings, because it's using electricity and that's not necessarily going to improve the EPC. But what it does do, and I did one last week, whilst the overall rating stayed at a D, the carbon rating went from a D to an A, because it put a heat pump in. And I think what you'll see, that will be brought out more, and there will be recommendations on new EPCs in the future that will say, recommend heat pump because that's going to help your carbon footprint. May not help with the cost of it. Right, let's have some more.
Are there going to be any exemptions for very old properties?
Well, I think that's part of the debate. There's people that have put in those sorts of questions into the consultation, and if you were being pragmatic about it, I think maybe that's one way of avoiding issues with older properties, trying to get them to the sea. Don't hold your breath on it though. I'm not sure. It depends on who if the net zero department in government have their way, that won't. No, but who knows? Things can change. Sorry.
You mentioned primary heat source. In a property with 3 different types of heating,
Yeah.
how do you determine which is the primary one? For example, you did an EPC on one of mine, told me that if I replaced the night storage heater in the hallway, that would get it to a C.
Right.
However, someone else has told me that's not the primary heat source, so it doesn't matter what I do to the night storage heater.
So what's your other primary heat source?
I've got a gas fire in the living room and
Right.
electric panel heaters in the bedrooms.
Right. So the primary heater is the night storage heater, always is. There's nothing. The other two are individual heater, room heaters, right? So they're secondary heating. So when you do an assessment, you look at the primary heating, and if you've got a night storage heater, that is always the primary heater. And the other two, you can only select one because you can only have one secondary heater, so you choose the most efficient, which would be the gas fire. So the answer is, if you want to be more efficient, you change out the night storage heater for a more efficient one.
Because the other guy said if it's in the hallway, it doesn't count. It's not a room.
No, that's not true. And I've been doing this for 10 years, and that's not true. Right, how are we doing?
Can they grab you at the break? Have they got any more
Yeah,
questions?
yeah.
Does that sound good?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah?
Okay.